my original birth certificate so that I could then claim my, be enrolled as a woman. Because other than that, I had a white family name. So I had to connect it too.
Yeah.
That would be a process, and that has to do with the work that you guys have done as well.
Yes.
So thank you again.
Oh, you're very welcome. That's, you know, those cross-racial adoptions were a way of terminating and killing an Indian. And so when we successfully opened an adoption, it was like resuscitating, bringing somebody back to life. So very satisfying.
And now I have 6 children, all in world mummies as well.
All right.
I just was going to go after her thing. I was adopted in 1979, right after the Indian Welfare Act in Washington. So thank you. And I was adopted into a native home.
Right on. Yes.
I just want to add that Kinder mentioned that I testified at the United Nations on the Rights of the Child Convention, and I testified on 3 things, and one of the things is that in case of disruption in family homes, whether it's individual or through war or famine, things that were happening around the world at the time, the children need to be placed in relative homes first, just kind of like the child welfare, or tribal or culturally appropriate homes, regardless of what their culture is, rather than adopted out or sent halfway across the world to a new country. And so that was one of the things, and that was one of the planks that actually got in there. I also testified on the right to work in dangerous professions. As you know, we've got fishermen up here, and children learn at an early age to go out. They go out in the ocean. It happens with the Sami people, the reindeer people, and in Russia, in the Nordic countries, and they were trying to say that you can't take children under 18 into those jobs. So that's how they learn. That's what they subsist on. So we testified on that. And the other thing we testified on is a child has a right to their own language, because as you know, much of culture is carried through your language. And if you don't have that, and I have to tell you how the United States responded to that testimony. The Department of Education came up and said, Indians don't want to speak their own language. There were 3 of us testifying, 3 Native people saying, we want to speak our own language. And at the time in my tribe, there were only 3 people who spoke our language left. That was quite a while ago. Now there's a lot, they teach it. But, you know, and so they said, well, we're going to have to get back to the State Department before we can agree to this language. And I'm looking at them like, are you kidding me? So they called that night, they called home to the Department of Education. You know what the Department of Education said? Indians don't want to speak their language. So that's a tiny little piece of what the battle was. Now, they weren't successful in that. I believe one of the planks is about child has a right to their own languages. And so that's important. But those are little battles that all of you will fight through your lifetime. And they count. And don't let them be erased, or don't ever let you yourself feel.
Sorry,
Okay, that your voice doesn't count. Because it's all those little steps, and I talked about Ramona taking the first step in one area, and then it multiplied into 2 other steps that were really important. So that's part of what your education is so you can walk those paths, and you can fight those fights, and continue to make progress for all of us.
Yeah. We actually got started in 1972 with Jim Anderson. And what happened is kids would be scooped up by CPS, and CPS only ever met an Indian when they were going into the home to take out the kids. And so they had a idea that we were all drunk, that we were all dirty, destructive. Their impression was just a total negative. And so they'd scoop up kids, and then the families would come to me in my itty bitty little office in the cemetery, and they'd be in tears. They'd say, we tried to talk to the social worker, she won't talk to us, and you know us, and we have a home, and we work, and you know, we don't drink, or you know, we're not drunks. And so on my little portable typewriter, I would type up like a little thumbnail about the family, and then I'd go to meet with a social worker, and you could just walk in. I'm the reason you can't just walk into their buildings. I'd go and I'd find the social worker, and I'd have my little thumbnail thing all typed up, and I'd be talking to them, and they would just freaking ignore me. They would just act like I wasn't even there. And so I would pick up the front of their desk and lift it, and all their shit would slide in. Then they would look up, then I would talk to them. Of course, they'd be calling security. But then I would talk to them, and their social work supervisor would show up. And because we had an armed fishing camp, and I had kind of a reputation, they'd pull themselves together, and a lot of times they would just give the kids to the relative. No meeting, no discussion, nothing. They had the thumbnail, they had the phone number, they had the address, and the kids would just magically be moved. As I started working with Jim Anderson, by then they're locking me out of the building. The security is on me. But Jim Anderson, the regional administrator, he could make a phone call and they would all come to his office. And I was right next door, and I'd bring the family, and we'd all meet in Jim Anderson's office. And that was the beginning of the local Indian Child Welfare Advisory Committee, and that was in 72, 73, and 74. So it took the Catholics running off with my little sister cousins, Patty and Karen, for me to bother going national. And that's when National Congress of American Indians, Tribal Chairmen's Association, and the Congressional and Senate committees got involved. And that was our Suquamish case, which you do remember.
I am a little bit younger. I was mostly in college in those real early years when Ramona was laying down the pathways and the roads and lifting up deaths and really advocating in a very strong way for families. And without that kind of groundwork, none of us would be able to progress.
Come on down if you're gonna.
You got your hair nice for a while, and then we'll do some.
You want her to go first? I think you're. Okay.
Okay, never mind, other way.
If you won't come on down.
You need him to come up.
Hi, my question is for Michelle. I wanted to know where can I get a transcript of that where you testify about the children want to speak their language? Is there a place where I can get that?
You know, I imagine there is. I don't know where. I was working on behalf of what is called the Four Directions Council, which are tribes in the East Coast and in Canada formed this, and they are actually an NGO, which is non-governmental organization attached to the United Nations. So they might have that testimony, because that's who I was there on behalf of. It was very intimidating. You sit in this big room and you have these earphones in and you can hear your voice, but you can also hear all this other voices being translated into other languages. It was really scary. But, you know, and I imagine, see, I was there, when did the Challenger blow up? What year was that?
87, 88.
That's when I was there. I was in Geneva when the Challenger blew up, so.
I've never even had a passport.
Try back.
See how worldly these guys are?
Send us off. Told us to do good work.
Hello. Well, my first question, first, thank you for all your guys' work that you guys have done. My first question is, what do you guys think about just the Shutsi language or any kind of, language being taught in public school and open to all non-natives, natives? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
In public school?
In public schools.
What do I think?
What do you think? Yes.
Okay. I'll tell you guys what I really think.
Yeah.
Okay, first at Puyallup, it was a Lashutsi. Is there anybody from Puyallup here? Yeah. So there are. It was a Lashutsi. Then it was Kulshutsi. Now it's Tulshutsi. And if somebody says something, somebody else says, well, that's wrong. And so I'm going to try to get my hands on Chinook jargon, dictionaries, and tapes. That was a trade language that was used from Alaska to Montana, all the way down the coast. And it's a true effort among natives to communicate, an effort to communicate. And I'm going to work on that because I really don't think I could stand it. You know, my mom was Puyallup. She was fluent in both American and our language. She talked all the time, but she wouldn't let me speak because she was beat bloody in the boarding schools, and she didn't want me to get beat up, and so she would not let me speak. But there were some things that I could say, and it's different than what these guys are saying in their classes. It's a different way of putting things. And so Lillian Ortiz came home to Puyallup, and she meant to teach me our language. But she said, a parrot can learn words, and so can a tape recorder. They can learn words. It's how you treat people, how you think and how you act, how you behave. It's not the words that you're speaking. It's how you mean them, how you care. And she said, in Scholalitude, we'll have forever. I'll teach you then. She said, for now, just keep being good. Just keep helping. And I don't know about them teaching basic words. They could teach Chinook anywhere, that would be a good thing. I don't know about Lachute. Lachute seed is up north, and Quillchute seed is down south. And so I guess if we're Quillchute seed, that means we're in the middle, right? Something like that. And my mom said Lachute seed, Quillchute seed is like someone from Vermont talking to someone from Georgia. If they really want to understand each other, they can. But they wouldn't today, they'd be correcting each other. Something has happened. We have canoe protocol where people are in a canoe, they've been pulling all day long, they have to pee, they're hungry, they're tired, and they have to wait for their turn at the microphone. They have to wait for their turn at the microphone to come in, right? Is that anyone's tradition? And then they all greet each other in Lachute seed, Quillchute seed, Lachute seed. I think we're slipping, kids. We have some serious work to do to get back to our ways.
Okay, do you move on?
Hello, my name is Julie LeClaire, and I'm proud to say I've been born and raised to fish on the Skokomish River. It's a tradition we pass down to our daughters, so I am just standing here in awe and just want to raise my hands to you for your work, and just know that it's carried on and we pass this on with our children, and we know it's an honor and a privilege to be a Fisher people, so thank you so much. I wanted to take our conversation to an article we were reading about DNA testing and tribal enrollment. Not so much a question, if you guys could give us some things to talk about, some things to consider as we move forward with our conversations around DNA and tribal enrollment. Any words of wisdom or guidance you guys could offer, I'd greatly appreciate hearing it.
Well, I used to be the elected secretary for National Congress of American Indians, and there was a resolution by these Indians about the Pueblos. And they were not Pueblos, but they did this resolution, and they wanted the National Congress to vote to force the Pueblos, or to recommend that the Pueblos enroll the children of the mothers. Because in the Pueblos, only the children of the men could be enrolled. I think it's still that way. My mom was like, she was traveling with me. She was, you remember my mom? She was like totally offended. She says, you always know who your mother is, but how do they even know it's their kids? And of course she had a really big mouth, so she stood up and said, you don't even know if they're your kids. And so, that was the rule though, and it's still that way, I think. And so the women, if you're a Pueblo woman and you don't have your children with a Pueblo man, they're just not going to be Indians all their lives. Well, that's cray-cray. So anyway, at Piala, now, because of the per capitas, there's there's a whole big thing about that. You know, if a Piala guy wants to, or should, or has to, or the mother is trying to enroll a child, the dad, the Piala dad, has got to do the DNA testing, because these gals are saying, oh, this kid's got a Piala daddy, you know, let's sign up for per capitas, and sometimes it's not the Piala dad, you know, so there are all these different issues around DNA testing, but we know just recently one whole family that's never been able to prove they were from a tribe really got one of the uncles, a real blood uncle, to do the DNA testing, and then they all tested in. That's how they were able to prove that their dad really was the brother of the one that was enrolled. The real father was absent or not cooperating. And so sometimes DNA testing can save a whole branch of a family. And then I'm sure sometimes it gets people excluded. Did I answer anything?
You were perfect. I just wanted to hear some words from you and you too. So that's something for us to think about. Thank you.
The whole idea, a lot of people, I look at the commercial on TV, the one that the woman says, and I found out I was an Indian, and she stood there and looked to buy some pots.
Oh,
And-
she was 26%.
Yeah, or something. Well,
An
being
Indian is never a percent. An Indian is always a fraction.
Yeah.
So she couldn't possibly be Indian.
But I thought it was funny because she got this DNA test, and all of a sudden, and I found out I was an Indian. Well, you know, there's some upside to that, because sometimes people are adopted out and you lose your family and you lose those connections, particularly in the old days. But on the other hand, all it can really tell you, if you didn't know who your family was, is if you do have some Indian blood. But that blood comes from anywhere in the Americas, the indigenous people in the Americas. So it doesn't tell you the tribe. It can tell you who your relatives are, and if they are enrolled in a tribe, like in the example Ramona gave you, then that's a different thing.
But they can pinpoint by region.
They can do some, but not as much as, at least from what I've heard about it. But in any case, I think the whole idea of identity, I remember Sam Kagi.
Yeah.
Sam used to say, as long as you have a drop of Indian blood in you, you have a responsibility to the people. And so for him, and that message is that if you identify as a Native person, you have a responsibility to all the other Native people around you, to your family, to your tribe, and to move forward in a good way. He also talked about genetic memory. And he said that blood gives you who you are. Oh my God, those pictures. Sam was a good friend of mine. I loved him. And he taught me a lot about being observant. And things come to you because you know these things in your heart and soul. And then there's the philosophy too. How are you an Indian? When Suquamish, years ago, was debating about adopting in people from other tribes, there was a lot of conversation about identity. How are you a citizen of a tribe? Are you a citizen because of your blood? Or are you a citizen because you live there, you participate, you give, you are part of the community, your children might be enrolled in that tribe, so should you be also a member? And I've talked to people at Yakima who used to say, well, when people would marry into our tribe, they became Yakimas. They became part of us, part of our family. So all this stuff about blood and identity, I mean, I'm sure everybody has their own opinions, and mine change all the time because I can't figure it totally out. My aunts always told me that as a Native person, I have some responsibilities, like Sam said, to live a good life, to never bring shame on my people, and to work for other Indian people. That was the instructions I got growing up. So that's part of my identity, even more than my tribal identity, because I grew up away from my tribe. I grew up here, and so I have more affinity to people here, and at Suquamish, when I was real young, he took me in. My dad went to boarding school with Suquamish people, and they became his family. Somebody asked about relatives, how you get your relatives. And my mother's German, primarily, or was. She's now, but I remember when I was about 12 years old, this whole group of Indian people came up from California, Sabova, and my mom says to me, you know, she invited them all in, my dad wasn't home, she says, who are all these people? I thought I knew all your dad's relatives. I said, Mom, these are relatives from boarding school. These are his friends. Those are the relatives, because they all introduced him. I'm Rudy's cousin. I'm Rudy, you know, and because that's who they were to him. And they were formed relationships. And that was part of his tribe, too. So I think that's a hugely complex question. That's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And in all of these Salish tribes, there were adoptions. You know, there were Indians who were raised by a family, and they were part of that family. And in the first enrollments, they were enrolled, and so there are a few people here and a few people there that have no blood from that tribal family, but have been recognized and are part of the family. But then they become part of the family, you know, subsequent generations. So, but now there are no adoptions. And it's all the Bureau of Indian Affairs and their practices.
There's some questions.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we should have a roundtable on DNA and a blood quantum someday. It'd be a very fascinating thing. So my question is, as women, and thinking about all of the women, sorry not to exclude you homeboys, but thinking about the women who have children, who have jobs, who are in a full-time education program, and being in the fight, what advice would you give to these awesome women fighters here in managing the whole of their lives?
Boy, I'm the wrong person.
You can be whatever, right?
No, I totally am the wrong person to ask. I graduated from Evergreen, so did my husband. I did contracted studies, and I was at my tribe, and I was working way more than full-time, establishing the tribal rights and services, and it was crazy. I mean, when you're a student, you're just broke all the time. I did beadwork and sold it to supplement my income to stay alive. Because our tribe had no money. Puyallup in 1968, when I was elected to consul, had no land, the Presbyterians owned our cemetery, we had no recognized rights, and that includes educational and health care or fishing. We had no recognized rights. The tribe had no money. The tribe had, I already said, no land, no services, nothing. And no recognition, and we had lost 3 major court cases, so legally we didn't even exist. And but you know, the most important thing to me when I was a kid was that I'm Indian. That was just the most important thing. And I tell my teachers, you know, I'm Indian. And they'd say, oh, you could pass for white. You don't have to tell people that. Why would anyone want to be white? my mom had taught me that the Asians had written languages while the Europeans were still swinging from tree to tree by their tails. That's the kind of stuff my mom told me. Well, I went to school, like the first day I went to school, and the teacher says, does anyone know Mary had a little lamb? I know it. All happy. Okay, you can recite it. And I said, Mary had a little lamb, her father shot it dead. Now it goes to school with her between 2 hunks of bread. That's the way I learned it. The other kids are all horrified. The teacher grabs me and hurries me out of the room and tells me, you must never ever say that again, you must never say that again, and stifled my little creative juices. But in the class, up above the blackboard, we have blackboards then, you guys, it said, A is for apple, B is for ball, C is for chair, and I is for Indian. Did any of you ever see one of those? I is for Indian, and it was the Indian chief with the headdress. And I was the only one that had a letter. There wasn't no C is for Caucasian and W is for white. I was the only one that had a letter, and I never was alone in a classroom. There was always that